Reading Infinite Jest can change your life, but Infinite Jest is notoriously one of the most unfinished novels of all time. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to read and complete Infinite Jest because I have helped hundreds of people finish this book. If you look at the playlist down below, I already have 70 videos on David Foster Wallace's work because Write Conscious is the headquarters of Wallace related content here on YouTube. And 13 years ago, my dad bought me this copy of Infinite Jest when I was 17 years old. And I was absolutely floored by the book. Of course, a lot of the scenes about drugs and women really spoke to my young soul, but just the sheer complexity and the challenge that it presented to me warped my mind in such a manner that I had to complete it. I have one memory of staying outside in my front yard and telling myself, I'm not going back inside until I finish this section that was super hard, that I had been delaying for a week or two because it just wasn't that interesting. And so it was in Las Vegas and it was 110 degrees outside. And I'm sitting out there in a lawn chair in the sun. And my neighbor, who was a detective at that time, was suspiciously looking at me like, is Ian too high again to find his way back inside? But no, I was knee deep in this same copy of Infinite Jest. But luckily, it isn't 2011 and you have to work your way through this book alone without any resources, without any reading guides. And I'm going to offer you guys multiple paths of completing Infinite Jest in today's video because I want to be forthright with you guys. I am running an Infinite Jest book club. That is starting this Sunday. And I'm also running a David Foster Wallace course and an Infinite Jest course where I am breaking down Wallace and Infinite Jest deeper than anyone else has ever done. But you may be broke. Maybe you don't like me. Maybe you just don't like reading clubs in general and you want to finish this book. So I want to help guide you toward completing this for free or just give you a preview and get you motivated to join my group or another group because I do know that this book will change your life if you finish it. And let me whip up some motivational magic here for your hearts because the energy you bring to Infinite Jest will determine if you complete this novel because there are going to be sections of this novel where you will have no idea what the hell is going on. There will be sections where you'll be with a character and you'll absolutely hate them. Or it will just be outright boring to you. Or Wallace will just be too extravagant and over describing something. And this isn't a small book. And there will be blocks of text like this for 20 or 30 pages where you'll be stuck in confusion or bored out of your mind. And to make things even worse for you, Infinite Jest is not a chronological novel because Infinite Jest exists in something called subsidized time, which is where the new superstate of North America in the novel has sold the calendar years to corporations to be named, for instance, the year of the Whopper, the year of the trial-sized Dove Bar. And every single chapter of Infinite Jest is from someone else's perspective in one of these 9 years. But it starts to become very hard over probably the 100 plus chapters about where exactly you are. And this is why it is important to have a group or have some form of knowledge of what is going on, unless, and let's talk about the first path right now, if you are an OG, if you just want to blow through this novel and miss a lot of it, but just can push through and you've pushed through hard books before and you think you can do it, then okay. That is not my recommended approach because you aren't going to get very much out of it. It's not like writing through pure inspiration the first draft of a novel because that is unconscious. There are things that you need to move slow with and will work better for you and you will enjoy it more if you have some help, which I'm going to get into later, the different help that you can and resources that you can use for free or different groups that you can join to read Infinite Jest. But that is one method that you just blow through this novel. But if you don't have a comprehension of subsidized time and when those time periods are taking place, then it will be very confusing for you and you will get very little of the novel's potential. And so most of the novel takes place in the year of the Depend Adult Undergarment, which is 2009 in our time. And Infinite Jest first came out in 1996, so it's a somewhat glimpse into the future. But what's also really confusing about time in the novel is that Wallace deliberately, first of all, shook up the chronology of the novel And next year in the reading group, we're actually going to read the Infinite Jest in chronological order if you are watching this at a later time. That's a fun way to read it. I think you should read it normally first because Wallace put it in this order for a reason. But when you go to the David Foster Wallace archive and look at some of the edits he was making with his editor and the different editions of Infinite Jest, there are small changes to the structures of time and these types of things. And it seems to be deliberate by Wallace to turn this into a key, because reading should be an animistic experience. We should be searching and engaging in our conscious and unconscious mind with literature, because that's what really makes it fun. And you may ask, well, Ian, why the hell would I want to read a novel that's going to bore me or confuse me? Because the highs of Infinite Jest, in my opinion, are higher than almost any other novel accessible to us. Because when you look back at the greats, most of them are dead. But Infinite Jest was written in the 1990s, and it's still applicable to us today. It doesn't feel too far off. And the whole message of Write Conscious is that we need to be reading literature or philosophy that will change our life, that will make us better human beings so that we can go and transform the world, because that is the point of knowledge. And that is the point of writing. You know, if you write consciously, you can help others. And I love what we are doing here already, because I am a high school teacher. I've been teaching English for the past 7 years, but my job title shouldn't be English teacher. It should really be like a motivational speaker, because 80% of the time I'm like running around the classroom with this type of energy, you know, trying to convince, them, like, come on guys, let's do 10 more minutes of Animal Farm, there's nothing exciting today, but a couple days from now, something big's going to happen. Like, please, come on, you guys, like. And I try to build up this big energy. But in school, you have to read, first of all, books at a pretty low lexile level, and books that necessarily aren't inappropriate. But Infinite Jest has every form of inappropriateness in it: sex, drugs, addiction, familial trauma. I mean, the list goes on, and it's described in such a at length and odd way that it will absolutely shake you to your core. And my first real deep dive I want to go into with Infinite Jest is that Wallace talked time and time again that this novel is about loneliness, because in our modern world, we are more alone than ever. And I hope that's not the case for you, but unfortunately, for many of us, that is our state of reality. And Wallace, I don't think, could even comprehend what social media and modern digital technology would do to further increase this isolation. And Wallace is the perfect person to turn to for advice on loneliness, because he was a prodigal writer. His dad was a professor of philosophy. His mom was a professor of English. When they would go on car trips, they wouldn't listen to the radio. I'm sure, when you went on car trips, I remember my parents would listen to like the Dixie Chicks and classic rock. And as a kid, I'd hate it. I'd be like, no. But now I realize, not the Dixie Chicks, but all the classic rock was like super sick. But it was somewhat entertaining. David Foster Wallace's parents would make them talk about grammar tenses and sing songs about grammar, and they would make fun of people who didn't speak correctly. And if you were at the dinner table and you spoke ungrammatically, David Foster Wallace's mom would start going and have a coughing fit until you sat and realized what you had said wrong. And eventually, Wallace went to a very prestigious university and eventually was accepted into Harvard's Graduate School for Philosophy, which is one of the most prestigious positions in the humanities. Only a couple people are let in every single year. But moving backwards, Wallace had this immense pressure on him to be a great writer, to be a great thinker, and he was. But if you were living in the Midwest and those are your types of parents and you're around a bunch of normal kids, you were going to be a little bit weird. And to kind of further accentuate this weirdness, Wallace joined the tennis team. And tennis is a major part of Infinite Jest, because there are 3 major storylines within Infinite Jest. There are many bigger, there's bigger ones, but the 3 main plot lines in Infinite Jest are this, and this isn't any spoilers. There is a tennis academy called the Enfield Tennis Academy, a little bit west of Boston, and it is run by the Incandenzas. And in the novel, there are featured 3 different brothers: Mario, Hal, and Oren. And this tennis academy is super hardcore. It's trying to create pro players, but it also has a weird set of academic rigors, because their father is an artist. We don't need to get too much into that, but it's a really screwed up system because a lot of the players are on drugs. performance enhancing or real drugs. And there is a ton of familial trauma and a ton of terrible things happening with the tennis academy. And so, in terms of loneliness, Wallace really harps on the point that at the highest level of sports, sports aren't supposed to be what they've turned into. When you go back to the Greeks and even Plato's Republic, and you were supposed to learn the sports to understand your own body and to learn a bit of camaraderie and not get mad at other people. I mean, that's what you really need to learn: how to have fun, how to exercise, and how to be a good loser. But now we have parents training their kids from 3 or 4 years old to be the next superstar. And that's a very isolating experience. And especially in a solo sport like tennis, where there isn't that much camaraderie and you're competing against each other. At least on a football team, I understand you compete for certain positions on the team, which can be super rough, but there's a bigger bonding experience. And so Wallace is really genius by kind of setting up that angle, which reflected his own life and his own experiences with tennis. And so if we flash a little bit forward in Wallace's biography, and I'm connecting all this to how he, I think, discovered the 3 main tenets of Infinite Jest, which are going to help us read it. If you kind of understand why he is doing this, it's going to help you. And a little bit later on in the video, I'm going to be providing resources and ideas and strategies to get through this book. But hopefully I'm giving you guys the motivation now to really dive deep into this book, because no one has ever talked about sports and the high level and the weird stuff that happens in sports better than David Foster Wallace, in my opinion. But second, so Wallace is attending Amherst College. And at the age of 22, when he is graduating, he gets a novel published. And not just with a small house, but with a big house, and gets like a $50,000 advance. And this is back in the 80s. Like, how much is that now? How many 22-year-olds do you guys know that are publishing literary fiction novels? And that novel, The Broom of the System, was a Wittgensteinian analysis of language and truth in novel form. I mean, it's a wild book. And so with this newfound confidence and this success, Wallace attends the University of Arizona in Tucson, where I'm at currently. And he absolutely hates the MFA program. He gets there and minimalism had taken over at that time, like the writing style. And Wallace is very much a maximalist. And so he didn't have a very good relationship with the faculty and stuff. And so he kind of goes solo mode and he starts slowly falling into drugs. And multiple times at Amherst, he had mental breakdowns. He took 2 semesters off because he had these major mental breakdowns and had to move home. And this kind of to further accentuate itself because he didn't feel supported at his MFA program. And in Tucson in the summer, it is hot as balls. Sorry for the profane language. Like today, I was out driving around town, doing a bunch of tasks, buying some books actually. And it's just like, oh my God, it's 100-something degrees. And so Wallace, who grew up in the Midwest and went to college in Massachusetts, didn't really adapt to it really well. So he just locked himself in a room, started drinking a lot, started taking drugs. He was allegedly sleeping with his older professor, sleeping with undergraduate students, kind of living that kind of edgy lifestyle. And he published another book, a collection of short stories called The Girl with the Curious Hair. And at this time, Wallace felt really lost. So he applied and got into the Harvard School of Philosophy to get a PhD. And only 7 people got admitted that year. And Wallace was seen to be a prodigy of philosophy while he was at Amherst, all his professors and everyone around him. And he eventually decided when he started writing fiction that he'd like to do that more. And he started to divert from that path. And so when he got to Harvard, he had like famous professors who were philosophers. I can't remember them anymore, but he couldn't keep up with it anymore. He was kind of out of that mode of thinking. And he was being a dick, and he'd argue with them and say like, you're wrong. And eventually he had a mental breakdown, tried to kill himself, and dropped out of school and ended up in a halfway house. And Wallace hid this for most of his life, but he admitted that he went to a center for help after he tried to commit suicide, but he never admitted that he spent a ton of time in a halfway house in Boston. And this was a shock to Wallace, who was raised, as I said earlier, in a very snooty environment, who went to prestigious universities. He was a rock star in the literary world and was seen to be, to do these big things in the future. But suddenly, Wallace was so deep into alcoholism and drug use that he's in rehab, he's getting sober, and he can't write anymore. He's like so out of it that he can't be creative. And he's hanging out with real addicts. He's hanging out with people from mostly the lower echelon of impoverished Boston who are heroin addicts and these types of things. And here's this lofty writer. And so it really humbled him. And a part of the program was you had to work a full-time job. So he started to work a security job. And I think for the first time in his life, really got humbled and really started to understand like the plight of modern workers and like drudgery and these types of things and somewhat be a little bit normal. And so Wallace basically recreates that entire experience in Infinite Jest with the Ennet house. And so in that section, there is featured, once again, no spoilers, a character named Don Gately, who is a former addict and is now a counselor of sorts for new people coming into the halfway house. And Wallace has, in this section, in my opinion, the greatest analysis and deep dive into addiction I've ever seen in a fictional novel. Because, of course, I have read some great novels that detail someone's life while they are addicted, like what it feels like to be on heroin and doing these things. But Wallace kind of takes us to the ground of getting sober. And there are stories, he tells some of the craziest stories, which I'm sure he heard, because his entire life, he was a daily Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and even other groups attendee. He would attend multiple groups a day, even like Christian stuff, even though he wasn't a Christian, because he liked to hear the stories. He liked to connect with other humans. And that's just a really way to get sober for anyone out there who's ever gone through addiction, showing up to a meeting 2 times a day and having a sponsor and stuff. It works if you take the program seriously, not for everybody, but it's helped tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people before. And when I was younger, I didn't necessarily understand a lot of this because addiction is such a funny word in our culture. Because when we think of an addict, we think of someone taking heroin, someone who gets drunk every night or is on pills or something like that. But I would guess that most of you guys are addicted to something. If you drink coffee daily, you are an addict. You don't need to take the same drug every single day. If you watch porn every day, you're most likely a porn addict or a sex addict. If you're into eating junk food all the time, you're probably addicted to food. And if you're not, then cut it out cold turkey and see how you feel. A phone addiction, screen addiction, like the list goes on. And when you look how it affects people's dopamine systems and stuff, these are real addictions. But we've been kind of trained to view addiction as a weak thing. And I've been guilty of this before, that, just get over it, that, it's not that bad. But most of the time, actually, me saying that to other people was a way to shield myself from my own addictions. And I kind of get into all this at different points in the channel, but it's really so easy in our society to get addicted to multiple things. One thing I don't think I've ever shared on this channel before is that I was addicted to Excedrin, which you may not have in your company, but it's a pill and it has acetaminophen, ibuprofen, and caffeine in it. And if I didn't take Excedrin every single day, I would get a migraine headache that would last 2 or 3 days. And it was really hard to get off of it because I would have to go through that hard period of pain. But what made it even worse was that when I was taking graduate classes and doing the university grind, like, I'm going to be a professor one day, I'm going to be a PhD, like thinking like that determines my worth as a reader or a thinker or as a writer, which it doesn't. And for anyone out there who's struggling with that, you can be independent. You can grow your own audience and think well without having to get a degree or do any of that. And if you want to, that's fine. But having to, I was going to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and having to drive from my house on the outskirts of Las Vegas down to the Strip every day and sit in traffic and be in that whole matrix and then go to classes and, with the bright LED lights and with all these stuffy professors and with these people in there who didn't even read the books or didn't care, I would get headaches automatically just from the stress or like just my soul didn't want to be there. And so I would have to take Excedrin. And if I didn't, I couldn't work. I would go there and I was like, okay, I'm not going to take it today. But then I couldn't pay attention in class. I would just have this blaring headache all day. And so for a good of the last 5 years I was in school, I was just a daily user. Then over the summer, if I could, I would get off of it. But taking acetaminophen and ibuprofen and caffeine every single day is terrible for you. And I've had much more severe addictions than Excedrin, but it's just interesting to note that many of us do suffer from hidden addictions or addictions that we don't want to acknowledge or think that are that bad, but that maybe took years off my life, all because I was making unaligned decisions, doing things I didn't need to be doing. Someone should have told me, hey, Ian, just go get an online degree. That's all you need to be a teacher. Just chill out. You don't need to be this professor. You were telling everyone that one day you're going to have a YouTube channel, that you're going to be a writer. Then just do that. But the Ennet House portion of Infinite Jest is great because you get, once again, in-depth analyses of the different parts of addiction. And let me tell you guys about some of those now. Obviously, we have recovery. But there are different stages of recovery. There are people who are just coming in, who are just going cold turkey and sobering up. And that is a really hard experience. And Wallace really captures at such a great level some of the weird things that people fixate on and go crazy about. Because when you're in that state, when you're recovering from heroin or something, you have to fixate on something else. You have to find something else to put some of that energy toward. And he captures some of that beautifully. He then kind of captures that, the middle moments where people are getting close to getting sober, a couple months in, 6 months in, who are starting to graduate the halfway house or starting to fail in the halfway house and leave the program. And there's a lot of analysis of that. He also gives us glimpses into some of the craziest stories from people in Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous I've ever heard. And if you guys don't know, in Alcoholics Anonymous, most of the time there's a meeting, maybe there's a lesson, but people get up and they tell their story. And Wallace has, multiple chapters where it's just people telling their stories. And it's some of the most entertaining, shocking, and beautiful stuff I've personally ever read. And it really makes you feel like you are there. A lot of us are never going to attend one of those meetings or be a part of the program. But think about this. We have a writer. We have this talented prodigal writer who is a maximalist, who is sitting there and listening, who is someone who goes to multiple meetings a day. And, for about 6 or 7 years before he publishes Infinite Jest. That is a lot of information. That's a lot of training. And I think he really put together some of the best stuff he ever heard, then obviously added his own fictional magic to it. And it's shocking. And it really shows you how low you can go with addiction, because a lot of the time we are almost limited by people's storytelling ability or their vocabulary in terms of addiction. And no offense, but sometimes I watch videos of addicts talking online, but they are addicts or former addicts, excuse me. And if they're on camera, there's that factor. They don't want to share too much, or, they lack the ability to just tell us in the full detail that we need. But that's what books give us the ability to do, to go inside someone's mind. And so that part is great. We also get to see Don Gately, who was a former addict who's now transitioned to being a counselor of addicts. So we're seeing these new people coming into this, system, but he's still shaky. He still is, wanting to return, like all addicts do, to his former addictions. And it's a very tumultuous path, especially being with new addicts and, all that type of stuff. And so you really get some great commentary on addiction in those sections. And so that's the second part of Infinite Jest that is really beautiful. And to circle back to the sports thing, also what the Enfield Tennis Academy really encapsulates is Wallace's familial trauma. When Wallace wrote this book, he wasn't on speaking terms with his family anymore, like with his mother and stuff. I mean, they occasionally spoke. And he was so nervous to give her this book to read. Like, it was already approved and in the late editing stages, and he still hadn't given it to her yet. And she was his biggest fan, all his life, and had read everything that he ever wrote. But he really features his mother and her totalitarianism through, one of the characters at the Enfield Tennis Academy. And that's true for a lot of the characters in that section. It's really somewhat autobiographical. And that's what makes it real and authentic too. And a lot of those characters really strike out at you because you're like, this seems really real. And so the third plot line, and this is so funny, it features a group of radical rebels who call themselves the Wheelchair Assassins. And they are Quebecanese, which is so funny as a Canadian. Wallace taking shots over at the Quebecanese. Of course, they are the ones who have a bunch of handicapped radicals trying to ruin the world. And Wallace creates a different political structure in Infinite Jest. And the United States and North America has become a super state called the Organization of the North American Nations, or ONAN. And their main mission is to secede Canada back away from the United States and Mexico. And their plan for doing this is through a terrorist tape called Infinite Jest. I shouldn't call it a terrorist tape, but there is the whole point of Infinite Jest. Once again, not really spoiling anything. You can read this on the back cover or just in the 2-sentence synopsis, is that there is a film called Infinite Jest. And if you watch it, it's so entertaining that you are just glued to the screen and you eventually die. And I won't get into much over that, but the Quebecanese rebels have a hold of this. And they want to use it. And we'll end it there, but it's so bizarre, right? And eventually, all three of these plot lines I just talked about also start to swirl about within each other, and we get a great amount of interplay with each other. And so that is beautiful. And speaking of entertainment in the novel, that is one of the major themes. And Wallace feels strongly about this and connects all three plot lines to this idea of entertainment, not just through the elusive film tape Infinite Jest, but through the idea that through sports, drugs, and entertainment, we are numbing ourselves away from reality. And Wallace was sensitive to this idea because obviously he is a writer and his job is to entertain people, and you have to be thinking about that, and you have to be super self-conscious as an author, self-conscious of yourself and your surroundings, and have anxiety, and things get really weird. But he was also a television addict. He didn't have a television in his house after he got out of recovery because he would watch television for 15, 16 hours a day and not write or not do anything. And this had been going on for on and off all throughout his life. And this is something we really don't talk about in our society because you can hide your screen time very well. Many people spend 6, 7, 8 hours a day on a screen, but they work a job, they, have a family, they sleep, but their screen time is astronomical. And what you are doing when you are doing that, especially at length for too long with mostly entertaining content. What I like about YouTube and podcasts and audiobooks and these types of things is that right now, you could be doing something else. You could be doing chores or something, and I'm entertaining you, but I'm also hoping that I'm helping you, and I'm encouraging you here to eventually, when you're done with this video, pick up a 1,000-page book and start exploring it. And Wallace actually made Infinite Jest antithetical to normal entertainment. I will tell you, not spoiling anything, but in a book this size, it's really hard to close all the loops. But once again, Wallace leaves a lot of the major loops open in the novel on purpose to subvert the common idea of entertainment. There are subversions of our expectation time and time again throughout that novel to push against kind of the modern grain of where reality TV and MTV and these things that he was witnessing come onto the scene were going. And what also subverts this idea of entertainment, and what I want to get into right now, is the footnotes of Infinite Jest, which, he has famously, about 100 pages of small text footnotes in a fiction novel, which is absolutely ridiculous. But what this does is, first of all, add the depth required, because I don't know if you've ever attended a writing workshop in school before, but sometimes when you are writing a story and it gets workshopped in class, people miss the key details, or, and they totally misrepresent the novel. I remember I wrote this short story that I loved about a shaman in the Vietnam War, and I gave it to my class, and you weren't allowed to speak, when you gave your story away. They had to discuss it and what they thought. And from the start of the class, some guy was like, I thought this was about Jesus. This little nerdy guy. Hate that guy. Anyway, and so for the rest of the class, they go on about how this is a metaphor about Jesus, even though it wasn't. And the professor was trying to pull everyone back because he obviously understood it wasn't about Jesus, but we were lost. And so, what if I had a footnote in there? What if I gave, during certain moments of that short story, this long footnote explaining, because I pre-predicted what the reader was going to think? And that's what Wallace does with the footnotes. Sometimes he pre-predicts what you're going to think, but this is a narrative. We are flowing through someone's thoughts. And so if he mentions, for instance, a drug, then that you have no idea what it is, he can't sit and explain it without it being weird, because if a character in a novel, let's say, mentions like acetylsalicin, which is a designer psychedelic, you don't probably know what that is. Most people don't understand that mushrooms or acid are just the start of psychedelic drugs. Anyway, but when Wallace mentions something like that in Infinite Jest, he may go on a 3-paragraph scientific or personal or whatever explanation of that drug. And the only way to make that work in a novel, if you wanted to include it, is have a character sit and explain it. Like, yes, I researched this drug and this is what it says. And that's wacky. That doesn't work. And so the footnotes are almost genius, especially in this maximalist novel, because it gives us so much information that we couldn't have, and technically you could skip. For instance, the Incandenza's boy's father is a filmmaker, and he's the one that creates this film Infinite Jest. And so at some point when we learn that he's a filmmaker, like I said, that's not too crazy of a spoiler. He's a filmmaker. But there's about 5 pages of small text footnotes about his entire filmography and the descriptions of all the movies that he's created, even though he's not a real person in objective Earth reality out here. But it gives you a glimpse of what he's into and like these weird things. And if you want to get into it, there's so many answers and these funny things there, but there's no reasonable way that he could have included, 2,000 words on this dude's filmography, especially in like a grid Wikipedia type format in a novel. And this also predicts the modern age and where we're going, because this is what we do. You hear something I say. Maybe you heard me say acetylsalicin, and now you're going to go look it up. Boom, instant. You're here. Now you footnoted that. I didn't really explain what it is or how it's different. And now you can go over there and do that. And the World Wide Web and stuff, which was coming up during this time, gave you the ability to do that. But Wallace uses footnotes in seemingly endless ways because, like I said, sometimes he gives a Wikipedia type description. Sometimes he'll give a scientific description of a drug or something. But sometimes we'll just go further in a character's head. Sometimes we'll hear almost Wallace rant about a certain opinion or a certain thing that, that he feels about. And this is great because Wallace is just as good, if not better, of a nonfiction writer than a fiction writer. If you haven't read any of Wallace's essays, I would highly recommend doing that. I have 7 hours covering his essay content in the David Foster Wallace course, which let me just break that down for you guys right now. So I have been a part of the BookTube community for a long time. I have been a part of book clubs and been a fan of so many different creators out there, but I never really felt satisfied with the experience that I got in people's Patreons or on whatever other platform that they were using. And certain things were always missing. Sometimes there wasn't enough content. Other times it felt like there was no interaction or no community. A lot of communities like apps like Patreon, for instance, aren't built to be community discussion platforms, aren't really meant to bring people together. And it can be hard. It's hard and you can get lost in the weeds. But it's really hard to build a community on like certain platforms because that requires layers and layers of knowledge. And so what I am trying to do with my Substack is really give the best of both worlds for people who love to read, to write, and talk to others about reading and writing. And so on the writeconscious Substack, we have a writing group, a Cormac McCarthy course, a David Foster Wallace course, all of my writing, and a book club. But what makes this course different is that we're not reading one book at a time, or book club, excuse me. We're not reading one book at a time or even 2 or 3 books at a time. We are currently reading 8 books. In the future, we could go up to 10, sometimes 6, depending on the length. Like it's hard to juggle 6 or 8 big books like David Foster Wallace at a time. But it's not just a book club where we read the book and then comment on a post about it, like I know other BookTube book clubs are about. What makes the Right Conscious Book Club different is that we have a weekly book club call every single week where, I don't know, maybe it would be just you and me. Maybe it will be 10 people. It's starting this Sunday. I don't know. I know I have a lot of people in there who are interested and are telling me they're going to come. And last week we did a test run and there were 6 people in a book club call. But I also understand that some of you guys, because currently we are doing the calls on Sunday morning mostly, Pacific Standard Time. So you maybe can't make that. Maybe you have a family. Maybe you go to church. I understand. So what I also feature, which is innovative for all of BookTube, is daily office hours. Every single day, I am available to talk to you about whatever questions you have about, the book or about writing or about, whatever else, or we can just sit and talk shit. Doesn't really matter to me, but I'm available every single day so that if you miss the book club experience, you can come and ask your questions and I can help you get through the book, because that's the key component that's missing from a lot of these book clubs that prevent people from getting through these books is the community aspect. Like, I am here to cheer you on. We are going to have a leaderboard of people who have completed Infinite Jest with the group. I'm going to get to know every single one of you and your struggles and your pains and if you like it or dislike it and your favorite characters, yada, yada, yada. Hopefully, if you come to the calls or in the discussion posts. And another thing I've done is kind of minimize the amount that you have to read, because that's always the big question. Well, how much are we reading a week? And when you stick to a schedule, like we're going to read a book a month, that may be fine for a book like Blood Meridian or something that's a standard 100,000 words. But when we have something like Infinite Jest that's a lot longer and a lot harder, I wanted to give an opportunity for people to be able to make sure they could finish the reading every single week. So we'll be reading 30 to 50 pages of Infinite Jest a week. And the other reason I did that is that so that you could join the other book clubs. So let's say you are a ferocious reader and you're reading all the time. Well, why not join a bunch of the groups and, get the same experience, but with a group. And what I'm also going to be doing is every single week before the book club call, I'm going to be posting a deep dive breakdown into the chapters of Infinite Jest that we are talking about. And these aren't going to be typical deep dive breakdowns because, for instance, if you go to the David Foster Wallace course now, I've been covering some of his essays. And for instance, one of his essays, Authority in American Usage, ended up being a 3.5-hour call, or excuse me, not call, analysis. And there's audio analysis and video analysis. And you can also listen to all the episodes on the Substack app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, which I think is transformative, because I prefer my podcast app to most other apps, like having to listen on Substack, which is fine, or on YouTube or something. But if I see a notification pop up on my Spotify from someone I subscribe to on Substack, and that's why I chose Substack, it's awesome because then I don't have to go to Substack to see it. So that's also going to be an integral part. That's the 3-prong system that I am going to be doing on my reading group, which is I'm going to try to get in contact with you. If you can't make the call, that's great. We'll talk another time. We can talk by email, whatever you need to do. Tell me your pain points, give me your questions. I will help you get through this. Second, I'm going to be providing a course that will explain everything. Like there's going to be no questions about what's going on once you listen. If you read and you're confused and you watch, you will know what the hell is going on. And then third, we're not reading too much. And that should hopefully give you the motivation to be able to get through it. Through the hard parts, like, okay, I just have to do maybe 30 or 40 pages this week of something that's rough. And I will tell you, like this week, this is the week, everybody. Trust me. And just a quick note to wrap up, I also host a writing group where we post daily poems and we do daily writing sprints where you can write with me. We just sit there and write together, and we have a weekly prose challenge and a daily poetry challenge. So if you want some motivation and accountability, for instance, last week in the daily poetry challenge, we had a bunch of people commenting the poems they wrote every single day. Then it's a really low pressure way to get started. For instance, writing a poem a day is hard, but it helps you get over perfectionism. So these are my poems from last week. You can go read them for free right now. There's no paywall on these. And so I hopefully have created a whole new space on BookTube that makes it easier to get into books and stay accountable with books, because once again, a lot of the groups that I've been a part of have been very low contact with other people and with the person hosting the group, and that's okay. And sometimes I'm just there to get the content, but I've now come to realize, as especially a person who creates courses and interacts with community members, that that's everything. I read the other day that with online courses that people pay for, like an average of 7% of people finish them. So someone may buy $1,000 course on a business, but only 7% of them are going to actually watch it. But if there's a community aspect involved and accountability and people checking up on you, that number skyrockets to 40 or 50%. And so judging with the amount of people I know who have failed Infinite Jest, which I think is probably less than 7% of people who start this book, finish this book, then I'm like, okay, it's the same analysis here. I could, post a breakdown guide, but there's breakdowns online already. Maybe not as good or as in-depth, but that's not going to get you through it. But if I send you an email like, hey, John, where the hell have you been the last 3 weeks? Which I'm going to do, actually. We're going to keep a leaderboard. We're going to have an accountability board of who is doing this. Then you're going to be more incentivized to finish the novel. And this is going to continue on. Right now, we're doing Infinite Jest, but we're going to be doing all the hard books. Gravity's Rainbow. James Joyce's stuff, like in the future, and we're always going to be reading Infinite Jest. Let me just say that. If you're seeing this a different year, currently I have 2 books that I'm going to be repeating time and time again, and that is Infinite Jest and Blood Meridian. I'll probably add the whole Dune series in there. I'm just going to continue doing it from a different perspective ad infinitum, because I love those books, and every single time I reread them, I feel more connected to them. All right, so that was a longish pitch by me, but the reason I let you guys know all that is to kind of let you see how hard of a book this is and what I've had to create to help the finish line rates. But let me help you guys now. You just listen to my sales pitch. So let me tell you, if you are solo dolo, if you don't have some money to throw my way, or you just skipped to this chapter to get this information, I still love you, and I'm happy that you are reading, because most people aren't. So if you don't want to be a part of a group, then how can you complete this by yourself? We talked about earlier about doing this cold turkey, no research, and I don't think you're going to get very much from this. And so I'm going to turn you guys on to some resources now that are going to help you. And what's funny is that no resources like this exist for like Cormac McCarthy, for instance. Like, I'm helping people out, but it's, his work is straightforward. There's a lot of analysis and literary criticism, but when a book is hard and there are like keys and cryptic stuff and puzzles and unanswered questions, it's going to manifest a lot of resources for it. So I'm going to go through my favorites with you guys and show you how to use them to complete this. And if you are going to join my course, or you're part of someone else's course, then I still recommend using this stuff and kind of getting your hands dirty with it, because it will help. Look at me now, Mom. I am green screen, but this is the Infinite Jest Wiki, which I highly recommend you use and go and check out and have bookmarked on your phone or whatever when you are reading Infinite Jest. And there are multiple resources here that I think are really going to help you. But first, the question, how to read Infinite Jest. One of the subsections of that question is, should you read the paperback version or read the ebook version first? And the first big feature that I think may help answer this question of the wiki is annotations by page. And this is going to be harder to have if you are reading it by ebook. And so there aren't any spoilers here. But for instance, as you read on page 3, which is the start of the novel, Wallace has these esoteric references to people, to things, like they're super complicated stuff. And so on one of the first pages, Wallace says the word Remington hung. But what he's referring to is an artist, Friedrich Remington, that's how you say his name, who's an American painter. And then you can go see his online art here. So if you want to see what it looks like, this is a great resource. And this is going to come in so much handy for helping you kind of understand the setting and some of the things that Wallace is doing. And as you see, there's so many, I'm not going to, spoil anything, but there's so much stuff there that's going to help you. And so I have read Infinite Jest in paperback and on an e-reader. And my opinion on this is I almost always prefer to read books, especially fiction books, with the real book. As you see, I've read this version so many different times. I have it taped together, Scotch tape. Anyway, but earlier in my life, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, when I was 19 years old, I was a ski instructor in Oregon and lived in like dormitory style employee housing. And so I couldn't haul all these books with me. So I just had an e-reader. And what makes Infinite Jest superior in one way only for e-reading is that you can go to the annotations, or the footnotes or the endnotes super fast. You just click it and you're there, and then you're back. And so that made it was very revelatory for me because, flipping back and forth is really hard sometimes, and sometimes you're not motivated to do it. You see the number, it's in a section you don't really care about. You're like, I'm not going to do that. But clicking is a little bit easier. And so that is one thing. But once again, you don't get to use these annotations necessarily unless you're really keeping track of where you're at without that, because almost every single version of Infinite Jest is going to be the same. And so when we go back, so there's also an alphabetical index, and I'm not going to click on anything here because it could be a spoiler. But for instance, in the A section, there is AA, and then it will tell you all the references to AA throughout the novel. But then in other sections, it will tell you, okay, this is where Leo Tolstoy was talked about. And so this is really good to go back, and also talks about characters. So if there's a character and you're like, have we seen this person before? You can go find their name and then go see like, oh yeah, that was that person in this section, and flip back and, oh yeah. And so this is really useful because there's going to be hundreds of characters in this novel, not to scare you away. And so going back to the homepage, there's also Infinite Jest storyboards, which is such a great link. You can get there independently, but you can go through the wiki to get there. And so this guy, who knows who he is, thank you, Poplar and Beechwood, created story frames of everything that's happening. So for instance, this represents the first page of Infinite Jest, which is where one of the characters, Howling Cadenza, is having an interview at the University of Arizona to join their tennis program. And so there are storyboards because, trust me, you guys, there are going to be times where you have no idea what's going on. And I can't skip further, but sometimes he does it like a comic book where there's certain scenes and you can imagine it. And so this is also very good. I mean, and what a spectacular resource, just kind of flipping through this right now. I mean, the guy that put this together, thank you so much. So next we have an atlas of Infinite Jest on Google Maps, which with 600 locations. So you can go here and start to see all these different locations in Boston, for instance, where Infinite Jest takes place, which is just super fun. Like, for instance, I'm in Tucson right now, and a lot of the novel takes place in Tucson. And I'm also going to be doing, just an FYI, this will be super fun, I'm going to be doing an Infinite Jest tour where I will take you guys to all the locations in Infinite Jest, at least in Tucson. And one day when I make it big, if enough of you guys join the course, I will hopefully be able to make it to Boston and then also to a bunch of locations for my Cormac McCarthy tour stuff. And that's just something I love to do. I love to see what these authors were seeing. So moving forward, there's also a diagram of all the characters in Infinite Jest and how they connect to each other. You guys can't see that from this zoomed out, but this is also a very great resource as you start to get into this to connect everything else together, because all the characters do intermix. There's a bunch of small misses or encounters that characters maybe don't consciously know, or we don't consciously know. And so he catalogs a lot of these different connections. So recommend this. Next, there is an infinite amount, excuse me, of places where you can do like live blogs, where you can read like other people's blogs or opinions while reading the novel. You know what I mean? You can hear them, through the written word, give their analysis, because there hasn't been too many full breakdowns done on video yet, because I think it would take so long, but there have been some written accounts. And so here is a character guide to Infinite Jest, which is, I think, even more detailed than the diagram, and it gives more clarity and explanation. So I would recommend that. And of course, there are summary websites out there that will tell you what's happening in every single chapter, like the big ones. I don't know any of their names, but if you were confused about a certain section, you can go get help for free about what the hell is going on. And so let us now return to the original question, which is how should you read Infinite Jest? And what I have learned from subsequent rereadings over the past 13 years is that you want to be as consistent as possible with it. And so you are going to hit a block. There's going to be a time where you're not going to feel comfortable or want to continue. And so you have a couple options here. And I'm not the police. I can't control anything. If it's really bad, and maybe you're one of the types that doesn't like to do the research, doesn't like to do everything I just said, but you want to complete it or you're connected to certain characters, you could outright skip the section. And I don't recommend that. But when I first read this when I was 17 years old, I was not sober. I was not in the best state of mind in terms of academics, partying, girls, end of high school. I think it was the summer I graduated. And I was working as a lifeguard at the Flamingo Pool in Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. And so life was wild. And so I would have these moments where I would come back to the novel after a couple weeks or be lost. And I've struggled with that a lot. And so during that time, I did skip some sections, which, not proud to say, but I did do it. And eventually I got in the mentality though. Eventually I was like, there were some sections that touched me. I was like, you know what? I'm going to sit out there. Like I said at the start, sit out on my front porch and finish this. I'm going to get through these sections. I'm going to do this. I'm going to actually focus and hunker down. But if that's what you need to do, no judgment. And should you read this sober? I mean, what a question to ask. But, speaking of drugs, first of all, there's caffeine. And I think caffeine would help you get into this more and get into the rhythm of reading. But a lot of the characters on this book and the author who was writing it was an alcoholic and a drug addict, or at least a recovering one. And there are some big themes. And that's why I think this book has such a resonance for young men, because they are on drugs. There are certain chapters that speak to people who are even just there's a beautiful section at the start of the novel on weed addiction. And so I do think it was somewhat geared toward people who aren't sober. I mean, it may not help you read it easier, but I think you'll get a lot of laughs and be able to connect to a lot of the ideas, especially if you're open, because, people who are drinking daily, smoking weed daily, don't want to be doing that. Most of the time, they're always looking to quit even just a little bit or limit use. I mean, you're always tinkering with every single thing you do in life with the amount that you are doing. Once again, I'm not shaming people. Do whatever you want to do. But I also think that that is an option that maybe could enhance the novel. Third, you should try and tell some people to read it with you, not to help, because you may not have any idea what's going on. If you want to help and you think you can help and you have a good relationship with them, then that's good. But this novel is notoriously unfinished because guys like me are like, bro, you have to read Infinite Jest. Oh my God. And I'd be giving it to my friends who weren't really that big of readers, and they would just DNF it. I remember one of my ex-girlfriends, when she came into my room with like my bookshelves for the first time, she saw Infinite Jest and she was like, oh yeah, this book's great. I was like, oh, you read it? She's like, no, I started it like 4 times because all my ex-boyfriends told me I should read it. Maybe that is when I should have walked out of the room or thrown her out of the house, which would have been a great idea in retrospect. But have you really lived if you haven't had someone drive you to the point of suicide and ruin your life? So you can gain motivation through other people's failures. I don't want to sit here and, say that we're the smarty pants, but you could be the one to finish. And I'm making as big of a guarantee as I can that if you come and you show up to the book club calls and talk to me and listen to the course material, that you will finish. I also think that you should read this without expectation of understanding for the first time. If you need to scan, skim, let go a little bit, and still continue to read, still be on the lookout for things and connecting ideas and remembering, then that's okay too. Because as someone who has read this close to 10 times, I still don't have this down. Like, I am not coming out here and saying, my name is Ian Kadnack and I am the expert on Infinite Jest. That is a goal, but it's going to take so much analysis, and I've met so many great people in so many different communities who are geniuses who just aren't as extroverted or just, don't care enough to build courses and help people through this. And so you shouldn't get down on yourself if you are not able to read this, or if it's hard for you and you don't understand certain things. And I think you should also connect to the storylines that you care about. And I suspect it will most likely be the Enfield Tennis Academy, the Incandenzas, the tennis stuff, or the Ennet Drug House stuff, probably depending on what phase of your life you are in. When I was much younger, I really connected with the Ennet Drug House, the Enfield Tennis Academy, because I had aspirations at one point in my life to be a pro athlete and like was working and grinding as hard as I could. So I understood a lot of that mentality and the anxieties and pressure to perform and some of the other great things that Wallace gets into. And so that stuff really spoke to me. And all the guys are addicted to drugs. And it's like, oh, that's so cool. But then, kind of the dyad of that when everyone is, in a halfway house at the end of that journey, it feels a little bit odd, to be a 17-year-old reading about that. You don't want to hear about that. When you're at McDonald's, you don't want to see a PETA person holding in front of you the cow getting slaughtered, or having someone lecture you, a paleo person, on how, McDonald's used to fry it in duck fat. Now they're using canola oil and it's terrible for you, which is true, but that's not what you're there for. And it starts to a promise with yourself. I do pretty thorough research before I start any book because I think, okay, it may take me 4 to 6 hours to read the common 100,000 word novel if I want to do it at a nice level that I understand it. And so that's 4 to 6 hours. But if I start a book for 2 hours and I don't like it and I stop, that was 2 hours wasted. And people do this all the time. I know so many of you guys out there and so many readers who do not finish books all the time. Have only been a handful of books I have not finished over the past, let's say, 5 years. And I read anywhere from 150 books to 200 books a year. I dedicate my life to reading. That's why I'm here with you guys right now. And that's because I do a little bit of diligence. If you spend 20 minutes at most, 30 minutes if you want to be hardcore about it, and researching what other people think about the novel and reviews and other things, you should have an idea, especially if you are thorough with it, if you're going to like the novel or not. And then once you decide to read something, you should just commit to finishing it no matter what, because you got this information and it probably still is true. Maybe it just was too hard for you. And I do this a lot because I really only read books that are recommended by other authors that I like. For instance, I have down in the link in the description below for free over 400 of David Foster Wallace's favorite books and authors. Go check that out if you're interested. The link to the course is also down there. And so I've read a lot of the books on that list. I've drawn from that. I have a list for Cormac McCarthy and Murakami and Stephen King, and a bunch of other authors I like. And I look at their list. I'm like, okay, yeah, that one looks good. And that's why because I trust them. They write what I like to read. So I think they mostly read what I would like to read. And so a lot of the time it's a little bit weird, especially when fans of this channel give me recommendations, because I'm like, I don't know you necessarily. I haven't been in your mind. I don't know your personality. You may think you know me, and you probably do know me a lot and what I would like. And so I've got a lot of good recommendations, but I'm a little bit more wary of that. And especially with people in person, right? If I meet someone and they're reading book talk shit, or like maybe have read some things, but aren't necessarily literary, which is fine. I'm a little bit more suspicious and will do more research with a more skeptical eye about what they recommend. And sometimes they tell me great stuff. I'm rereading right now Empire of the Summer Moon about Comanches. And I remember when I was in my first year of college, some Mormon kid, because I went to university in Utah, this Mormon kid who was honestly kind of a dick, anyway, don't get me into that, told me when he heard I was into Cormac McCarthy and I was talking about cowboys and Indians, he was like, oh, you need to read this book. And I was like, yeah, right, bro. Like, what do you know, man? You're from a little small podunk town. You're about to go on a mission. You've never partied or been with a woman. Like, what do you know about the world? Great recommendation. Absolutely knocked my socks off. When I went to this university library, I was like, looked at it, I was like, damn, yeah, let's do this. So you need to commit to this. You are in minute 50 something, most likely right now, of this video. You've heard about this book before. Maybe you have started this book before. You know what to expect. If not, go read the first couple pages. The first two chapters are maybe 10 pages total, 10, 15 pages. Go read that. See how the writing style is. Go read a David Foster Wallace essay online for free. He's published many and many magazines that are on for free online. Go read one of those and see if you like his writing style. See if you like the footnotes and the endnotes and all that type of stuff. And then commit yourself. Say no matter what, I will read every single word of this novel. And if you have to skip, like I said earlier, whatever, but I'm going to do this. And when you start to do that, that will change your reading life, really, because you are more deliberate. You don't just read anything. As I mentioned earlier, I think you need to read this book with 2 bookmarks, one at where you're at and one at the footnote section. And I think you need to read Infinite Jest with an open mind to a new style of writing. Wallace can appear at times to be very flat, to be bleak, to be so in his head and so nuanced that it almost comes across as flat, like it almost is over edited or something. But you have to relax with that because you will feel that. But what he's really doing is layering it and working on his stuff so hard and with symbols and stuff that if you logically try to figure everything out as you are going on so that you can do it one time. I mean, I've talked to people who are like this. They're like, I'm going to finish it on the first time, which also leads to not finishing it because you don't feel like you are understanding it or getting it. And so the logical mind should not really be at work here. You're going to need it to understand and interpret, but beyond that, trying to solve is silly because we have been almost ingrained in the humanities, which is totally wrong, that books and these things are problems to solve. But literature is not. This isn't a STEM course. This isn't, you don't win the book if you understand it more than another person. But if you feel what the book's about, if you let certain parts speak to you, which can only happen if your intuition is open, then you are a true winner. And that's one of the secret messages of this book. Like I said, it's about entertainment and loneliness. But when you start to connect deeper with yourself, it's easier to connect with others. And I have shared actually a lot of joy with Infinite Jest with other people by becoming less prone to my addictions. Not everything is solved yet, you guys. I'm not perfect. And when you have the definition like I do of all these different things, screen addiction, caffeine addiction, whatever else, I guarantee you probably have at least 3. Where does that all come from? And that really ties back to a lot of the tennis stuff and the ambition. And so you're reading ambitiously. You have to get through this crazy novel, right? And you're sitting here and you're like, oh my God, and it's taking forever. But to successfully read Infinite Jest, you need to lose all ambition. And coming back to the how, well, what is the why? Why are you showing up right now and wanting to read this novel? And I've met a lot of people. Like I said, I've helped hundreds of people read this book and talk them through it and many other books. And one of the reasons that people fail is that they're coming into this for superficial reasons. You want to read it because I'm telling you that you should read it, or that's the greatest novel of all time, or these types of things. But then what is that saying about yourself? Because why do you want to understand the greatest things of all time? What kind of validation is that going to give you? Because when the Infinite Jest marketing campaigns start, as I talked about in my video yesterday on Harold Bloom on Infinite Jest and in many other videos, they send out direct mail. Can you finish this novel? The unreadable novel. And it's still kind of maintained that status today. And there is a status, there is a prestige to having finished this novel if you've tried before and these things. But, all status and all prestige is fake. And if I was a good businessman or whatever, I would sell that to you. I would sell the status or the after, when you tell someone, about a workout plan, you show the before and after photos. But I don't know if this is exactly going to improve your life. I know in the long run that it will, but I don't know in the short term what it's going to do to you. For me, it gave me permission to be crazier, to go more in. I was like, damn, there's people acting like this and writing like this, and David Foster Wallace was crazy. I'm going to be crazy too. It gave me a lot of confirmation. And like I said, I missed out on a lot of that stuff on addiction or on family trauma, which I didn't start thinking like, oh man, how's my family screwed me up until much later in life. But here are the ways that it also can change you. You will feel accomplished. Once you are done, you are done. And then you will, for all of time when I'm talking about it or other people are talking about it, you will get to have an opinion. And that's the rule. If you've read a book, in my opinion, you are a scholar. You don't have to read every single word David Foster Wallace ever wrote. If you have read a book and you have an opinion on it, you have one vote at the table, you have an opinion. In my office hours today, I was talking to a man, super cool guy. He is getting a PhD in neuroscience, like the neuroscience of language. Shout out if you're listening. But he had read only some Cormac McCarthy novels one time. But when I was hearing his theories about them, I was like, these are very well developed. Like you could sit down, write something and expect it, with some revision or a little bit of practice to get this published in the Cormac McCarthy Journal. Like this is good analysis. And a lot of you guys are the same way. And if you pay a little bit of attention, if you do follow some of the notes, there are going to be these theories, there are going to be these open-ended questions that you're going to be able to discuss with whoever has ever who has finished this novel before. And they're glaring. Like I can think of at least 20 things that you and I could talk about like not just what we thought about it, but like what could happen or what happened here or like why was this person here? And then we could talk obviously for hours about what was in the novel. I also think that if, this seems daunting to you, or if you were a newer beginner reader, this is kind of like a book that can take you to the next level. I remember once I read this, everything else got easier because fiction can only be so hard with entertainment. Like tell that to William T. Volman or like other people, Pynchon or even Wallace. But, as you were continuing on this journey, you guys, Infinite Jest compared to certain philosophical texts is super easy. You know, if you're going to sit down and read Kant's bibliography and want to comprehend it at a deep level, I mean, this is going to seem like TikTok, the most addicting TikTok reels. And so I do want you guys to continue progressing. I mean, over time, you can keep progressing as a reader. And I think this is a good work because you do get a lot of fiction. You know, you can read a long fantasy novel. There are fantasy novels that are out there and you could read the entire thing. And I don't think it really makes you a better reader, even if they're hard. I mean, it makes you a better reader. But what's interesting about Infinite Jest is it deals with the real world. It deals with problems that we are going through and names them. It's not like through characterization or plot or human choices of morality, the big questions that are answered in a fantasy or sci-fi novel or predicting where we're going. This is where we are. And it's dealing with questions of that nature, which really kind of create a compounding effect in terms of your ability to grow. Because if you're reading the endnotes, you're learning about some of the crazy stuff in here, then by the end of it, you're going to have a much more nuanced and complex view of reality and know a ton more. But in a sci-fi novel, you really don't get that because a lot of that stuff is useless in reality. And you have to make a parable or turn it into a symbol to or personify and bring it back to our reality. And last but not least, how you read Infinite Jest is it with an open mind as a writer, because Wallace is going to show you the levels of the game. And fiction is such a crazy art because recently we have more moved into the personal narrative, first person POV. And this was partially because of, you know, just the huge ramp up of MFA programs and diversity quotas at publishing houses. And it's easier to find people with compelling first person POV narratives that are good than, you know, finding people like this or trying to push the limits of literary fiction. Like that's far and few between and it doesn't sell as good. And so, you know, there's kind of been a shift away from stuff like this, but there seems to be a calling and a craving for writers like David Foster Wallace again. We are looking for complexity and intensity after kind of this authentic, my voice, my story era of writing, which has been fine for, you know, there's always a movement. But in fiction, I really do feel like what we've been going through is somewhat akin to the beat movement. We've been hearing from disenfranchised or marginalized voices more and getting their perspective and maybe having work that isn't as good. Like we've kind of regressed in terms of quality, in my opinion, but that's not always bad. Like the beats, you know, compared to, you know, Jack Kerouac, well, he wrote some poetry, but, you know, some of the beat poets compared to some of, you know, Robinson Jeffers or, you know, some of the Rilke and the modernist poets weren't as good, but they were bringing more of life and reality to that. And so then when new poets, like for instance, Robert Bly, Donald Hall, Mary Oliver, and others kind of took the mantle up and transcended the beat movement, it was way better because they combined both elements. And so I feel like we are at the next wave because this book doesn't let us know about the internet. I mean, the internet is somewhat present, but it's not there yet. And the magnitude of it was never really explored by David Foster Wallace, even in his nonfiction or his interviews. And so we have kind of gone through this new sincerity era, a genre that Wallace really created in media and these things, and we've been hit with the authentic. But now we're with AI and stuff, it seems like complexity is coming back. And so I think as a writer, you can step into that. You can step in to maximalism because, like I said, a lot of these first person point of views narratives don't have that depth and are inherently minimalistic. When I look, oh, there we go, at the prose in Tommy Orange's There, you can just tell that it's like much simpler writing. Octavio kept the gun pointed at me. First person, you know, hardships and these types of things. Wallace, if someone's going to point a gun at somebody, is going to go crazy for the entire thing. So what tips do you guys have? Tell me about your experiences reading Infinite Jest if you've made it this far. Tell me your expectations. Tell me how you're going to handle this. I know there are multiple reading groups reading Infinite Jest right now out there in the booktube world or in different aspects of the internet. And so if you're a part of some of those, how are you going to approach this? How are you going to get through this? I know this is a big thing in our community right now. I'm happy to kind of be a part of this. And I will be dropping for free, if you guys are a little suspicious, this Saturday, I'm going to be dropping the breakdown, what I'm going to be posting in the course for chapter 1 of the Infinite Jest course here on YouTube. And on Saturday and on Sunday, I'm going to be posting some Infinite Jest tour videos. So I hope that excites you because it excites me because that's never happened before. There are not many people on YouTube who have released on the ground videos of where the story is taking place. So until then, I'll see you guys in the next video.